actually twice a year here at Open Door Baptist Church. We take 2 months out of the year and we dedicate those months to missions emphasis. That is the month of January and the month of June. And this month we've been talking about missions and having missionaries. I think we've had a missionary here every evening during this month. We had a young lady here last Sunday night who's going to China. And I'd met her in Pastor Hughes's church. She's out of his church. And we support Brother Reese and some other missionaries in China. And so I told this young lady, I said, I don't know that we'll be able to support you, but we will buy your plane ticket and help you that way. And so she was here last Sunday evening, and I asked you folks to give, and her ticket was $1,200, and you gave $1,600. So I told somebody this morning, I said, I would love to have seen her face when she opened up her envelope and saw that $1,600 check. I'm sure that looked like $1 million to her. And you know, you're an encouragement to these folks who are trying to get to the mission field, more than you ever know. And I want to talk about that today. I want to talk about how you can help send the gospel around the world. And that's what I want to talk about today. It's just a very simple, very basic message, but I hope you'll take it to heart. And more importantly, I hope you'll respond and become a part of the mission outreach of your church, and do what you can to help missionaries, because we cannot obey the Lord's commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel unless we get involved in missions, because that's what missions is. It's taking the gospel around the world. I read about a survey by George Barna. He's a senior pastor in the United States, and he found out that only 15% of the churches had as their top priority a missions program. And I think this explains why the average churches do so little for missions. And if missions is not the top priority of the pastor and the leadership of the church, we certainly can't expect it to be important to the people. And so that's why we spend so much time talking about it. We have missionaries here. We have a large display out in the auditorium of our missionaries we're supporting. Their letters are posted so you can read them. There's a big map out there so you can find out where they're serving. And we do that so that you'll have a burden and a vision and maybe feel some relationship to these missionaries. There was a fellow by the name of David Barnett. He did an annual status of global missions report, and he stated that only 0.1% of the giving of a church went to global foreign missions. And that is an average. On the average, churches are giving only 10 cents out of every $100 to missions. Now you think about that and you'll see how small the missions giving is in the average church. And here in Philippians chapter 4, I want us to look at an example of missions giving. And because Paul had been sent out of the church at Antioch, he's the first missionary recorded in history. And he went out, and the church at Philippi had been involved in supporting him financially. And as he closes this letter to the Philippians, he wants to commend them for their sacrifice and for their care for his mission ministry. Now here in verses 10 through 19, I think first of all we see a pattern for missions that you can follow. And certainly if God has something He wants you to do, He's going to tell you how to do it, or He's going to put a pattern before you so you can know how to do it. And here we have a church that is a pattern for missions giving. And it's a wonderful example of giving. If you look at verse 10, Paul said, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last your care of me hath flourished again. Now you'll notice that this word care is used. Your care. And the word care is connected with their giving. And it has to do with somebody that's really interested, somebody that's emotionally as well as financially involved in Paul's ministry. It is more than just a legal thing or something methodical that they do, but they really have a heart interest in it. And so they were interested in Paul's ministry and his mission work. Now listen, if you never read a missionary letter and you never pray for a missionary and you never give to missions, then you probably don't care about them. Because I have found that we invest our time and our money in what we care about. That's just human nature, and nobody's exempt from that. Whatever is important to you, you invest your time and your money and your emotions in that. And so it's evident here that these Philippians, they not only gave, but they cared for Paul. There was an emotional connection. They loved him. And they loved what he did, and they believed in his missionary endeavor. They cared about the people that Christ died for. And that was revealed in their sacrificial giving. And look at verse 14 in this text. He said, "Notwithstanding, you have well done that you did communicate with my afflictions." Verse 16, he said, "You did communicate." And once again, they had demonstrated to the Apostle Paul that they were partners with him. Their giving had been an act of communication. There are many ways you communicate. You can communicate non-verbally. You can communicate by writing. You can communicate with body language. You can communicate by your giving. And their giving was a means of communicating their care for missions and for the Apostle Paul. That's how we communicate in many ways. That's how we communicate our love to God. One way is by giving. I mean, actions do speak louder than words. And these folks, they certainly are a wonderful example. The word communicate means to participate. And so it is someone who participated in this ministry. They were partners. You'll hear missionaries say many times to their supporting churches that you are partners with us in this ministry. And you take Brother Dutton over here. He's been 30 years in Korea. He couldn't be there 1 year if churches in America didn't support him. They must have this care of God's churches here in America and other parts of the country, communicating that concern and partnering with them. And that's what you ought to do, is you ought to show your care and partner up with missionaries by giving for missionary support. And certainly a missionary that spends many years on the mission field will be rewarded by the Lord Jesus Christ, but so will all those people in churches who participate in their support, because they cannot do it by themselves. I heard a story one time about a fellow who went to India, and he visited a leper colony. And these lepers were planting a little garden, trying to just survive. And the missionary said he saw two lepers in the field, and one was carrying the other one. And the one who was doing the carrying had no arms, and the one who was being carried had no legs. And so the man who was being carried had a bag around his neck, and he had some seed in that bag. And as they would walk along, he would drop a seed in the ground. And the man with no arms would take his foot and he would rake the seed, the dirt over the seed, and then he would tap it down with his foot. And the two of them working together did the work of planting the harvest. And by planting the harvest, many, many people within the colony would be taken care of. Now also in this text, there's a disturbing example. If you look down about verse 15, he says, "Now ye Philippians also know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but you only." Now to me it seems strange that no other church would support the Apostle Paul. You know, I can't help but wonder about the church at Antioch where Paul came from. Paul went out from this church, and yet he says, "No church communicated with me," there in verse 15. What about the church at Rome? What about the church at Corinth? Or the church at Galatians? Nobody communicated with him. That is, nobody helped in this mission field, in this mission endeavor. And I understand that some churches can't do as much as others. But you know, listen carefully. When a missionary comes in here, you know, you only see what is before you. You have absolutely no idea how long that missionary has been on the road trying to raise money. And I've been at this long enough and talked to enough missionaries, and usually when a missionary comes in here, if it's a husband and wife or a man, my wife and I will take them to a restaurant afterwards and have a bite to eat with them and get acquainted with them. And I discovered that in many cases, missionaries are on the road 5 to 7 years trying to raise support. I mean, it's not uncommon for a missionary to have to spend 3 to 5 years to try to raise support. Brother Dutton, I've never talked to you about this. How long did it take you guys to raise your support? 2 years. Okay, that's exceptional. And that was way back, yeah. So 2 years. Now listen, for 2 years, he and his wife and their kids traversed back and forth across America, going to churches. 2 years, presenting their burden, showing pictures, trying to get churches to have the burden to help support missions in Korea. But I know of missionaries that they've dropped out before they ever got to the field. They go out and they'll spend 5 years trying to raise support, and it doesn't happen. And so they begin to think and they begin to question even their own calling. Maybe I got this all wrong. Maybe God doesn't want me on the mission field. I can't get any support. And then missionaries are just people just like you. And here they've got a burden and their heart is broken and they're giving their life to try to go to a mission field. And they assume that the people of God have that same burden. And they go to churches and present their burden and they can't get their missionary support. And then some of them become cynical and bitter at pastors and churches because they can't get their support. Now, I don't believe there's a lack of money. I mean, I see Americans, they are looking for something to waste their money on. Really, this is no joke. Americans are looking for something to buy. They don't need anything. You go down here to the mall anytime and you can't even find a parking spot. I guarantee you that 90% of the people in there shopping don't need one thing that's in there. They don't need it. They just have to buy something. Young people are caught in the same trap. They're looking for something to spend their money on. And while there are missionaries that can't even get on the field, can't raise money to get on the field, churches are indulging themselves and buying junk that nobody needs. Right? Of course it's right. And so what a disturbing example when Paul said, "No church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only." I certainly hope Open Door Baptist Church. I really don't want any guest speaker, any missionary, any singers, anybody leaving this church saying Open Door Baptist Church is a stingy church. I'll tell you what, guys like to come here. They really do. I mean, we treat them well. And I mean well. Yes. Well, it's the right thing to do. You know what? You treat a guy well, he puts you on his prayer list. Lord, I'd like to go back there again. You know, bless that church, I'm going again. See? Give and what? It shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. And that's true of individuals, and that's true of churches. The liberal soul will be made fat, the Bible said. And so you need to be liberal in this matter of giving for missions and for your ministry. Now notice the assessment that you can make as Paul describes their giving and helps them to look at the missions giving. You're able to do it in a right perspective, because it's possible for a dozen people to look at mission giving and come up with a different conclusion or a different motive. But really, first of all, he calls it an act of spiritual accumulation. You see that? He calls it giving and receiving. There in verse 15, he says, "No church communicated with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only." And when we think about these words, giving and receiving, they're really bookkeeping terms, because you have a debit side, which when you give, that's the debit side, and the receiving is the credit side. That's what you get back. Giving and receiving. Now the Bible is very clear. Whatsoever a man sows, that's giving, he shall also reap, that's receiving. That's the law of the harvest. It's true in life. Whatever you give, you get back, one way or the other. He that hath friends must debit, show himself friendly. You get it? So that's the principle. And so there is this matter of giving. I was yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, it seems like yesterday. It's been a long day already. This is one of those days that it seems like I left home last week. Do you ever have those? You know, I missed about 6 days in there somewhere. But here's my point. As I was coming to work this morning, I was thinking about how good God has been to me and my wife. And, I've got this handicapped van out here that I had to buy. And I'm going to give it a camel's name, because it'll kneel down for me. If I push the right door, it just kind of kneels down, and I just crawl on it, and it gets right back up. So if you think of Eli would be a good name. Eli the camel. That's going to be my car's name, Eli. Okay? Eli. Okay. Okay. And but I'm driving in, and I'm thinking about this and how good God is to us, to Mrs. Blue and me. And I did some scouting around, and I was able to find this nice 05 Chrysler minivan. It's all set up. It's over $40,000 worth of just accessories, so that it'll kneel down for me and all that kind of stuff. But my point is this: I was able to save about $8,000 on that by having a right lead and getting it from a private party. Now, $8,000 is pretty good savings to put in your pocket. Then someone the other day, Pat Stevens, Pastor Stevens up here, I was talking to him, and I didn't even mention a wheelchair, and he brought it up. He said, "Pastor, I've got a man in my church. His father died. He has a brand new, state-of-the-art wheelchair, and I think that I think you can have it. And if so, we're going to see that you get it at no charge." And so he called this guy. Pastor Stevens calls me back and said, "It's yours. Here's the phone number. You go pick it up." So my wife and I went up to give it, and the fellow went up in the back room and drove it around out of the garage and around and brought it around. And he said to me, he said, now, I put more distance on that wheelchair just now, bringing it out here, than my father ever put on it, because he's too proud to use it. And I am too, but it's nice to have. But anyway, it's about a $2,000 wheelchair, and it's absolutely free. Well, let's see, that's about 10 grand, isn't it? I'd say that's a pretty good blessing, right? I'm just simply saying, and by the way, it's just that kind of thing, and that, God provides not only things like that, but He provides those little things, you see. And there are so many of them. And, you have to learn to trust God and then see how God provides for you. And you have to be attuned. And by the way, if you start giving, it'll do something to your senses to where you will see all the good things God's doing for you. You see? But if you don't give, there's either one or two reasons. Is you're either afraid to do it or you're selfish. Now, I've found that that's usually one of the two things. We're either selfish, if I keep this, there's things I can buy for myself, and I can have all these things if I don't give. Or, if I do give, God won't take care of me. So there's that fear. Now, I don't know if I can help you with the selfishness, but I can tell you, you can trust God. If you're afraid, you need to step out by faith and see what God would do for you. And He will do it. He will do it. There's also this act of spiritual adoration. Look at verse 18. He said, "But I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God." Now I want you to notice what Paul calls this missions offering. Now, what would you call it? A missions offering? A sacrifice? What would you call it? Well, here he calls it a sacrifice, an odor, a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. Now, in the Old Testament, a person would bring their sacrifice to the altar. Today, in this culture, people bring their tithes and offerings. And that's why when you put your offering in the offering plate or in an envelope, I think you ought to bow your head and you ought to thank God that He's made it possible for you to give. And you ought to say something like this, Lord, I thank You for giving Jesus for me, and I'm glad that I can give this back to You. And I want to worship You with it. I mean, we talk about worship, and worship is singing, and worship is lifting the hands, and worship is this. Worship is giving. See? It's giving. And so it's called a sacrifice. It's well-pleasing. It's like a beautiful perfume. And so you ought to, when you give, it ought to be your attitude ought to be that I love the Lord, and Lord, I'm giving this for You. Andrew Fuller, he was helping raise money for William Carey to send him to India, and Fuller asked friends to make a contribution, and a man said, quote, "Since it is for you, Andrew, here is 5 pounds. Fuller said, "If you're giving it for me, just keep it." And the man got the point and said, "Here are 10 pounds for the Lord." And if you have the idea that, I'm giving this to Pastor Blue, or I'm giving this to the church, or I'm giving this to the missionary, you've missed the point. You're giving it to the Lord for the Lord's work. And that the Bible's very clear on that. Now here's a promise you can count on. I want you to look at verse 19 with me. They'll put it up on the screen. Verse 19. "But my God shall supply all your needs How? According to His riches in glory by Christ Jesus. Now there is the promise. And this is a great promise, and many of God's people quote it and use it. You'll hear missionaries quoting it, you'll hear Bible school students quoting it, and so on. My God will meet your needs. But by the way, many times it's misused and misunderstood, because this promise, if you look at it, at the content of the promise, D.L. Moody said that this is God's check. And he said it like this: my God, that's the name of the firm printed on the check, shall supply, that's the promise to pay, all your needs, that's the amount to be paid, according to His riches, the deposit of the account against which the check is drawn, in glory, that's the address of the bank, and by Christ Jesus, that's the signature which appears on the check. And so God has promised to meet all of your needs. I was telling you a minute ago how that the Lord had provided for me and my wife, but you know what? Let's just stop preaching for a minute. I want to say something to you. And if you don't get anything, get this. In 5 years of Bible college, with raising 5 kids, my wife never had to work out of the house, and 38 years of pastoring, there has never been a minute that God did not meet every one of our needs. There's never been a time. Never. Now, I've had some big wants, but I'm glad now I didn't get them. I'm thankful I didn't get everything I wanted. But every need has been supplied. And Paul promises here that God will meet all of your needs when you put Him first. But you have to learn by experience. You have to step out by faith. You have to believe Him. You have to trust Him. I've told this story. I only have one life, and I've only lived one life, and so I've told every story, everything I know, and some of the things I'm not even sure I did, I've told you. But when I was a young man working for Boeing down in Seattle, my wife and I lived in an 8-foot wide trailer house. It was 30 feet long, 28 feet long. And we had 2 boys in it at that time, and our 3rd boy was born while we were living there. And we were attending the Tukwila Baptist Church. It was just a little mission church there, not far from where the mall is down there now. At that time, there was no mall, no freeway. So this tells you how long ago it's been. But somewhere I had heard or read about tithing. And I said to my pastor, Larry Pollock, I said, what is this tithing bit? And he said, well, if you got time, I'll explain it to you. So we invited him over. He came over to our little trailer and sat down in there, and he began to explain to me that tithing, the word tithe, means 10%. So he said, Ken, he said, tithing is giving 10% of your gross income for the work of God. I was sorry then I asked him, but he said that's what it is. And I said, well, we need to figure out, what my gross income is. And so we sat down, figured that out, and he said, now here's what your tithe should be. I got paid every 2 weeks, and he said, here's what it should be. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. We have, we pay for this trailer. I've got a car out here, and, we're young, and we've got a lot of foolish debts, household finance, and all that kind of stuff. And so we figured out, we sat down and figured out what our monthly payments were. And my monthly payments really were more than my income. And he said, well, it doesn't look like you can tithe. I said, whew. I said, what should I do? He said, do it anyway. Do it anyway. Now, I'm glad that I obeyed God. I'm glad that preacher didn't try to let me get off the hook. If he had let me off the hook, I wouldn't even be in the ministry today. because God doesn't call disobedient people to the ministry. I can tell you that. And so I'm glad that he told me that. And so I started tithing of my paycheck that I got from Boeing. Boeing began to get all these contracts. People in Seattle, all over Snohomish County and King County were getting jobs. Houses were being built. Families were being taken care of. All because I started tithing. Just think, if you'd start tithing, how it would affect our economy. You know? But God had blessed. Now, you know, and so God promises to meet your need. And that is the context of this promise that we're talking about here, because there is a condition on it. You do not have a right to quote this verse if you're disobedient to God. This text was given, this promise was given to a church that was financially supporting missions. A church that's robbing God and not concerned about missions does not have a right to quote, "But my God will supply all your needs." Neither does a Christian. You're quoting it out of context. The context is based on the fact that they were giving. And Paul said, "Don't you worry, my God will supply all your needs." Listen carefully. I have young guys going off to Bible college. In fact, there's just a guy just recently that went off to Bible college, and they go down to Florida, and they go over here to Lancaster and different places. And here's what they'll ask me. They'll say, "Pastor Blue, when I get down to Florida or get to California and get in the church down there, should I tithe there or should I send my tithe back to Open Door Baptist Church?" Without fail, I tell every one of them, when you join a church down there, you tithe to that church. You understand me? I want them to obey God, and I believe the tithe ought to go to the local church, and the mission support ought to go to the local church. So I never tell these guys, of course none of them ever have any money anyway, so it's really not much of a sacrifice, but I never tell these guys, when you get down there, send your tithe up here. You go down there, you join that church, you tithe to that church. You support missions in that church. You understand me? And those of you who are members here at Open Door Baptist Church, that's what you ought to do here. You ought to tithe here. This is your church. This is your family. This is your church family. And these are your missionaries that we're sending out. So there's a world that needs to hear the gospel. I liked what the choir sang this morning. Who will go? Here am I, Lord, send me. Or, who will give? Here am I, Lord, I'll do it. I'll give. And so I want to challenge you this morning. I want to challenge you. Those of you that are not tithing, I want to challenge you to start. Start. I did. It's the right thing to do. And then those of you that if you're not supporting missions, what you need to do is you need to add a missions offering to that. On your check or your offering envelope, you should indicate what percentage of it goes to missions. And then our money counters and the hospitality ministry, they make sure that that is divided out as it is supposed to be, and it is put in the missions account, and it is sent off to help missionaries. Now I'm looking forward to our folks coming back from the mission field this coming week. Now, what's it all about? What's the point in taking this trip to the Philippines? You know, if it's just a holiday and just a foo-foo trip, somebody missed the whole point. Here's what needs to happen. Some of these folks need to see the need and get the burden. And as a result of that, there will be those who will pray for missions. And there will be those who will surrender and go to the mission field. There will be some in that group that God will touch their heart and they're going to surrender their life and become missionaries. That's what will happen. And then there will be those who will give and give more to help missions. Okay? So that's what it's about. Now, what will you do? What will you do? The Philippian church gave once and again to help Paul with his mission ministry. What will you do? What will you do? You realize that if you'd start giving, it would be an act of worship for God, to God. It's a way you worship Him. It's a way you show your love to Him. And Paul said it's a sacrifice that's well-pleasing. I would bet, I don't have any doubt about it, that there are missionaries in every part of the world, when they get their little paycheck during the month, that family will open that check and look at it. And then they'll get on their knees and they'll thank God for you. And they'll pray and say, Lord, thank you for Open Door Baptist Church. Brother Joseph over there in India, those people over there, those Indian people, they get on their knees and they thank God for you. Brother Joseph tells me, he said, our pastors over here pray for Open Door Baptist Church all the time. Maybe that's why this church has been so blessed. People are praying for it. Maybe that's why God has made it possible for you to be liberal in your giving, is because other people are praying for you. I talked to Roger Bayona in the Philippines just yesterday or the day before, and he said, Pastor Blue, our people are praying for you every day. You know what will probably happen at the judgment seat when I stand before God? I hope that I've done something that will be commendable, but I have an idea that most of the credit will go to those people, that many of them I've never seen, who have held us up in prayer. And God says, you know why I blessed you? Let's see that little widow here. She's over there in India, lives in a hut. She's been praying for you. That fellow over in Korea, he's been praying for you. That's why I blessed Open Door Baptist Church, is because so many missionaries and their people are praying for you. Did you ever stop to think that that might be why we are blessed? It's because others are praying for us. So let's make it possible that we can bring to missionaries a gift that is well-pleasing, that's an odor of sacrifice, pleasing to God. And let's listen. Some of you need to get over this frivolous stuff. We've got folks spending $50 to $75 a month for cable vision, which you don't need at all. You could give to missions. If you buy 2 or 3 espressos a week, add it up in a month, what you could do for missions. If you rent 2 or 3 videos a week or a month, think about it, what you could do for missions. You young people, you think you don't have any money. You got money. You're at the mall buying jeans that somebody's already wore out. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. They want jeans that are wore out. When I was a boy, when they were wore out, they put a patch on them as a sign of being a poor boy. Now they pay $100 for a pair that's already wore out. I'll make a deal with you. You give me the $100, I'll give you some wore out jeans. They won't fit you. You can make 2 pair, but listen to me. Some of you are spending money on cell phones and iPods and CDs and DVDs and movie theaters. If you would just calculate it, you could take half of that and give it to missions, and you could do something that would matter. The rest of it is wood, hay, and stubble. It's going up in smoke, and it doesn't amount to anything. It just satisfies the flesh. That's all it is. So you want to tell me we